Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like him. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.
I'm KC.
And I'm Tyler.
And you're listening to
The Element Podcast.
What is happening, folks? Guess what? You're listening to The Element Podcast, and it is like hunting season, man.
Holly, I don't think so.
I don't think so, but it almost is, so I'm going to say it is, you know? Like, we're actually going antelope hunting next week. Super stoked about that. But it is time to start zoning in on the deer stuff, and if you haven't, it's also time to start kind of getting your gear lined out. The Element Podcast is brought to you by First Light Gear. Go to firstlight.com and you can find out all kinds of stuff about the stuff you might need for the early season. Might I suggest the Trace system. We're going to be wearing a lot of that with our antelope hunt that's coming up pretty soon. And we've been kind of sitting around thinking and talking about the way we're going to approach this thing, because it's a new deal for us, right? Hunting antelope, especially, they're going to be mostly on the ground from what we understand, and it kind of relates back to, of course, deer hunting for us. As weird as it sounds, Tyler and I can be outside picking cucumbers and zucchinis and just find a way to relate it back to deer, right?
Yep.
So
we just put it in the same video back in the day.
that's it, man. We've been looking at some old Element videos. So if you've been around since Sheds and Beds, we appreciate you.
Actually,
Thank
we
you.
apologize to you.
Thank you for sticking through the hard times. So today we're going to talk about some of our biggest mess-ups, our biggest mistakes, deer hunting whitetail from the ground, from a tree, with bow in hand. I don't know, you might have some gun stuff on yours. I haven't looked at your list. It makes it kind of fun if we don't know what each other's going to talk about here, but we're going to talk a lot about the stuff that we've done wrong and the lessons that we have learned to circumvent that, to maybe get just a little bit better at this thing we love doing. And Tyler, I will just go ahead and say, as I went through my list, I went chronological over the past 5 years or so. I do believe this is trying to be pragmatic, not just like the way I feel, right? But it looks like I got a little bit better, which is kind of what we want to do, right?
Good,
like
yeah.
I had a lot of dumb mistakes. I had many to choose from like the 20 teens, you know. But as we got into the 2020s, those kind of got to tighten up a bit. So I'm kind of thankful. I'm sure this year will remind me that I still have a lot to learn.
Yeah, last year reminded me. So
Good.
I have lots of things to choose from too, and I've probably forgotten the worst mistakes, but there are mistakes on this list. Regardless, so
What do you think, just looking after going through your list and adding some, overall, what situation is tough for you?
man, that's a good question.
It might be hard to do an overarching thing because we're
I
going to
tried to have some diversity in my mistakes here. So that's a hard one, looking through my mistakes. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, good. I'm glad you mess up in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. There's no, like, I don't know if there's a, this is a thing for me. It's just like these are mistakes I've made through the years,
Yeah, I think that, like, encounters seem to not be too much of an issue for me, but getting something killed with archery equipment is where the mistake usually happens. Like closing that distance to get in archery range and to go ahead and get a shot off seems to be a difficult thing. So why don't you tell us, we're going to go chronological here, all right? And the format is, guys, we're going to talk about the situation. We're going to talk about the hunt itself. We're going to talk about the thing we messed up, the thing we did wrong, our mistakes. And then we're going to talk about the lessons learned from that and how we circumvented that in the future to maybe try to not be so dumb.
Can I tell this in a kind of a fluid story, or do we want to address each thing?
No,
okay.
I just telling them that so that we know just kind of what they can garner from our story.
Okay. So Kansas, 2018. We were hunting a property that we had permission to hunt that was a really cool property for where we hunt. It had cover, which is something we don't have a ton of. It had food, which is something we don't have a ton of options on. And it also had some of the stuff that we do normally hunt, which is a little more like kind of grassland type of habitat, right? It had a lot of different edge habitat and these kind of things. Well, we got permission on this thing. And, you know, I don't know how we did it. I think it's like 400 or 500 acres. And it was a really cool place. So it had a shelter belt that went east and west on it. And that was kind of the main piece of cover that we typically tried to hunt. And the first time we ever went walking down the edge of that shelter belt, there's corn on the north side of it. We found like 2 sheds. You found like 2 sheds walking in.
It was in the dark, when I found those.
And one was like an old gnarly looking buck with a weird like pedicle or something. It was a really cool little shed, but we thought, oh, this thing hasn't been hunted in forever because these are just right here on the edge of this cornfield. There's going to be some good bucks around. This is going to be awesome. Well, on the shelter belt on the north side, if you're watching on video, I'll kind of try to draw this out for you with my hands. So on the north side was all the main trees that were planted originally in that shelter belt that were tall. And then south of that for like probably 60 or 70 yards was a lot of like tumbleweed, brush, extra hackberries and elms that were growing up, you know, that had come from seed. And, you know, all this is like little brush and all the kind of junk in the junkyard there from the homestead that was nearby. And so it was like brushy on the south side of that. But there was a couple of trees, a cedar tree that was really big that I know I could have hung in kind of south of me. Well, so I start thinking about where I'm going to hunt this morning on the shelter belt. And we're both hunting the property, but we're hunting different areas. And as I think about it, we've got a north wind. It's going to be really crisp and cold this morning. It's not going to really be blowing much, but it's just enough to be considered a north wind and actually matter. And I'm like, man, I'm just going to sit on one of them trees on the north side, and I'm going to try to have good shots out to the corn. And that's my main – the corn was cut, but that was my main consideration. And these deer are going to come up and down this thing because the sheds are there, right? Who cares? And I had thought about this, but who cares that the wind is blowing to the south side of this shelter belt? Well, I see a deer enter the shelter belt on the other end, and lo and behold, like 15 minutes later, this deer – comes down the shelter belt behind me at like 60 yards, maybe not even. By the time he would have gotten straight south of me and almost got my wind, he'd probably been like 40 yards or so, right? But there's brush everywhere in the way, and he's getting to where he's about to be downwind of me, so I give him a little grunt, and he ends up coming, or maybe I think I actually just kind of barely touched the horns together. It was real quiet. And he comes working towards me, but then decides to work downwind. And before I could get a shot at him, he got to probably 20 yards. He smells me, and he gets out of there. And I thought, man, if I'd have just sat in that cedar tree where I knew they should have been cruising, it's logical to think they're cruising that in that shelter belt, in the cover, smelling all that stuff. He ain't really worried about corn in November. And so basically – instead of just wanting to see stuff and shoot one in a cornfield like they see on TV, I went – that's what I went with, but I should have gone with the more practical and logical idea that really you have to hunt the trail from the tree, not the one that lets you see the best or whatever. Because seeing bucks, like we talked about just a second ago, is awesome and it's fun, but killing them is a different story. So that's the lesson I learned is like just take your logic and hunt that instead of hunting what you really want to hunt or what you want to see sometimes.
So 2018 was also a year of a lot of learning for me. It was my first year to really hunt out of state. So a lot of things changed. And I've hunted on the ground for deer a decent amount in my life, but it's kind of always been like maybe ground blind setups or kind of sit and wait type stuff. And I'd never done the run and gun type thing very much. And we were hunting a piece of public ground that really there wasn't a tree to hang in on that place. It was all just rolling CRP grass. And we were learning as we go out there. It was a new place for us, and there was some deer around. It was a pretty exciting place to hunt. And I didn't know that much about calling deer at that point in time either. I had rattled in deer in Texas, South Texas stuff, but that's just, I don't know. It's like when you play the South Texas game, you're really just doing there's so many deer out here, I'm going to do something, and maybe one of them will come over here. Mm-hmm. Whereas out there, we actually saw this buck at like, I don't know. We saw him from a long ways off, half mile probably. He came from this homestead over there where there's some big old cedar trees in windrow, and came down and worked a scrape at like, I don't know, 300 yards from us or something like that. Mm-hmm. And we rattled to him, and he threw his head up and like just came in just on a string. It was really exciting. And at that point in my life, to be honest, it was scary. Mm-hmm. Like I was just not used to that. And the biggest deer I've ever drawn my bow back on at that point in my life. He wasn't like a monster antler-wise, but he was a mature buck, at least like a 4-year-old deer in the Midwest, a huge body. And it was cold that morning. We were set up in like just this little, I don't know, there's like a levee or something there that had some taller grass or like 4B stuff in it. And we're just trying to hide just in the bald open pretty much. And I drew my bow back on this deer and asked Tyler what the range was. And I don't know if we hadn't really planned it out or whatever, but you really shouldn't have been responsible for the range in that situation. Well, but it was like
I also hadn't been practicing my voice to text where you tell them what punctuation you want at the end of it, right?
Yeah. So I think that it was just like we couldn't believe it was sort of working, so I was unprepared for the situation. And I was like, hey, how far? Or what's the range? And you said like 36, like you kind of like had one of those at the end of it. And I was just like, okay, sounds good. And I don't even know for sure if the range mattered that much or not, because I settled my pin. Everything felt really good. I released the arrow, and then about halfway there, I see my arrow just go whoa, 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 and just boomerang through the air, except it didn't come back. It just flew. And then that deer runs off because he didn't know what just happened. So, I mean, he's not hurt at all. I like knock another arrow and kind of get up on my knees, and he looks back. Tyler snort wheezes at him, and he just knows that we're not his friend anymore. Mm-hmm. So he leaves out. And that was a tough lesson to learn, because I just kind of realized, like, man, it was just not going to go easy for me out there on the ground. Like, that's when we started figuring out that the ground hunting thing was tough. And I also learned at that point in time, it was like my first venture into, hey, maybe I shouldn't shoot these really lightweight arrows with mechanicals, because that's essentially what happened. My arrow's pretty lightweight. I was shooting a Rage, and it hung a piece of grass. I mean, just a little blade of grass, and it just threw my arrow just in a tailspin pretty much. And so to fix that in the future, we just really worked on our craft on the ground hunting thing, trying to figure out how to actually do that and kill deer. And then I also went down the rabbit hole of all the FOC heavy arrow stuff, and ended up now in a pretty good place on that stuff, I believe. So yeah. It's gone well since
one thing I just realized is that's the pretty close to the same setup that you had when you were successful on the ground this year. As far as same direction that the buck came in, same sun was at the same kind of. Mm-hmm. What we didn't realize at the time is that deer probably couldn't see us at all.
Probably
we
not.
should have just let him keep coming. Mm-hmm. But you're spooked. You're just like, there's no cover here.
He's at like 35.
Yeah, it's like we got to get a shot on this thing. He's in. And in all honesty, like, he's in the same situation as that buck this year, where you were able to draw and still like make that deer comfortable enough to keep coming with like a snort wheeze, and just situation that also, it's another lesson that I feel like just kind of hit me. It's like, man, that's a good lesson.
You're right. It is the same scenario. It's kind of weird, huh?
Yeah. So the next year, I drew the old famed Iowa tag.
Ooh, good for you.
And this was in one of the good units in Iowa, not just Iowa, but like, one of the better units for us as well, for anybody, but for a non-resident, it took years to draw. And I was really excited about this thing. So I actually have a couple of stories from my time there in Iowa, because it's a time when there's like pretty immense pressure, because I've spent all of my money on this tag. I don't have any money. I barely can afford to even get up there with gas and all that. And I potentially have a chance to shoot the biggest buck ever and video it, right? Like it could be important to our YouTube channel, and therefore important to maybe potentially me one day actually being able to tell people with reality that I live as a bow hunter. That's my career, or whatever. So that was a huge moment in time, right? That season with that tag. So I go up there with KC, and we decided to go the last week of October because we wanted to beat the November rush up there, right? We're going to hunt a lot of public, but we had been put in touch with a guy who worked in agriculture and knew a lot of the farmers. So we get to hunt some private. And basically the scenario here is we see a buck probably halfway through the hunt that's a stud. He's not a high scorer. I feel like that deer's like 140, like low 140s to low 150s maybe type of deer. He's kind of had a weird antler.
It's
but
hard to
Big
tell, too,
Ten.
because those Iowa deer are just so big.
Right, and he was.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is he was a square body, just mature big deer that just didn't quite have the rack that maybe Iowa people are going up there for. So maybe he's just, 6 years old and nobody wants to shoot him, right? But essentially, we find this deer, and we, over the course of a couple of days, figure out that he's bedding in this drainage that's like topping out in the middle of a gigantic property. So it's actually kind of hard to get to because there's nowhere to park. It's really open, bean fields and stuff like that, anywhere close to this place. So you have to walk a long way, and people just don't want to walk sometimes, So even if there was pressure around, this is a very it's a remote area essentially, even though you wouldn't think of it that way looking at it on a map. So we go and figure out that this we get closer and closer to him. One afternoon, actually, I think it was like the afternoon before, KC and I are set up pretty close to where we think he's bedded, and he and another big buck come out, both of which I would have shot. And there's a doe that's hot with them, and they start to kind of chasing around and just posturing towards each other.
October 29th.
Is that the day?
Yep.
And so they end up, the big buck that the bigger of the two, he kind of just chases this buck off, and the doe kind of gets weird and starts kind of hustling down towards us. And there's like a faint trail at like 25 yards. I mean, she's coming, right? And all of a sudden he just turns and starts walking to her, and then he kind of giddies up a little bit, right? They're fixing to do this thing, and it is wide open. We got shots. We're going to have video. Like everything's going to be good, right? And he ends up turning out. She turns out and goes and get to a place I didn't have a shot instead of going down that trail. And then so the next day we didn't mess anything up. So the next day we end up going back in there and trying to do the same thing in the afternoon. It starts snowing, and we get in there, and I don't know that we have permission to cut any limbs or anything, even though it is private. So I just start tying stuff I got a bunch of paracord. Well, I'm cheap. I don't have any money, so I'm not cutting this paracord up. I'm just trying to use the tag ends to tie all these branches and give me some shots on all this stuff, right? Wind was blowing decent, but long story short, we call the bedded buck in with all the racket that we were making, getting dressed, and I'm putting on my last jacket, and KC just boom, hand on my shoulder, hold on, and I look up, buck is basically turning around and bounding off.
At 25 yards.
Oh, he's so close, and probably had ended up, within 50 or 60 yards of his bed. So I guess, the thought there is, the lesson learned, the solution is that, when you're setting up on a bedded buck, got to be super quiet. I mean, it sounds obvious, but even in the wind and the snow and stuff, we felt like we had some cover. We kind of got lazy towards the end of that setup, or I did, and I was being just too loud, and I called the buck in. It's happened to be advantageous for you before, and probably for me at some point too. Last year in Oklahoma, but overall, you usually call them in and they catch you moving around.
Yeah, I can't imagine how many of them we don't see.
Yeah.
when we do that.
I know, man.
Like,
I know.
we just so happened I glanced that direction and saw him turning and running.
Oh, yeah.
So, like,
we were fixing to not even see him.
Oh, yeah.
And just sit there all evening and just false hope.
yeah, just be crying.
I was
feeding
crying anyway.
Pop-Tarts to possums. That was the highlight of that evening.
Well, we did see that big 7-point.
Yeah, he was
Almost
cool.
shot.
Yeah,
Yep.
I was hoping you did, but you didn't. I'm
We
glad
had to-
you didn't.
We had to go home the next day.
Yeah.
So
it looks like we're going to learn a little bit more about Iowa here in just a minute. I also have some 2019 stuff. We're going to back it up a few months, though, because that was the year I drew that awesome New Mexico elk tag. And if you are watching this, there's a high likelihood you've seen the video because it's, one of our original, like, very popular videos. If you haven't, you got to watch it. It has the most pristine, beautiful elk bugle footage that you probably have ever seen in a video. Insane. So I'll tell you a little bit of how we got in that situation. Tyler and I are way back in the backcountry. We don't have a clue what we're doing. We go in here. We're setting up a camp, right? And we're hearing all these bugles up on top of the hill, and we're like, should we go hunt those? And we're like, yeah, we probably should go after those,
Yep.
And so this whole time too, I'm like trying to figure out what's a shooter in this unit because that's like a coveted unit, I don't know what a big elk looks like, and I did a lot of research and all, but still the whole time that's on my mind I was like, is this a elk I need to be shooting? Anyways, we're hiking up, and we don't do a lot of calling actually. We're just kind of doing like the whole spot and stalk thing, try to get in close on them and try to get a shot, which actually is a really good tactic. But we get fairly close. We see just like a elk rut fest going on, which was awesome. There was like apparently 2 bulls. There's a lot of bugling going on. We can see a cow. We see this giant bull run down the hill where we can't see him, and we hear and there's like this big elk fight that we don't get to see. And then he runs back up the hill to come back to his cow. She trots off. And we're like kind of caught out in the open at this point in time. I don't know if we were trying to move
we're trying to move
a little bit better spot. And Tyler's like straight up in the open. Like I can only imagine how you're feeling back there, right? And he's got a camera and a 2-dimensional decoy. I happen
to be a 3-dimensional guy, though.
Yeah,
You'll find out later on.
And he's filming, so he's like doing a whole lot of stuff, right? And I'm a hunter. And I've got some brush around me, but I don't really think about our situation. I just think about that elk's going the wrong way. It's the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life. I got to bring him back here. So I give him a little cow call, and it's enough to turn him, and here he comes. He's coming back. And I've got some cover around me. I'm feeling pretty good. I don't know what you look like back here, but he comes out and kind of comes down in front of me and like comes up this little rise and just kind of stops. He probably was seeing both of our heads sticking up there at that point in time. But I come to full draw when you should. And if you've watched the video, you're probably screaming, shoot, 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 because it's just like the perfect frontal shot on an elk. He's at 20 yards for me, 25 from Tyler, and he's just straight on looking at us. And I have oak brush in front of me to where all I can see is like this elk's chin and up. So all I can really see is the stuff you can't shoot. And I, in that moment, was just like, okay, I'm just going to hold, and he's going to move, and I'm going to be able to get a broadside shot, no problem.
There's a cow that if he'd have gone to the cow, the only cow in there.
Yeah, she's just on our left, like real close.
He would have come right through opening broadside.
But he didn't. He stood there for 3 minutes and some change because he bugled at about 2:30 while I'm still at full draw, and then goes from like fairly calm to just, I'm going to leave, just runs, and I have no shot. So I have to let down. I'm rattled. I'm sad, as I can be in that situation. Tyler tell you, like, I don't really get down until after the moment, and believe me, that happened. But I am rattled, right? I'm like, crap, it didn't happen. So I move up. We kind of run up the hill another 20 or 30 yards, and I do get another opportunity at this elk. I, at that point in time, was shooting a 7-pin sight. So if you're looking at home, it looks like this, or backwards of that.
You've gone very much the other way.
There we go. Yeah, I've gone very much the other way. I got that many pins, right, that I'm looking at as I go full draw, and I have like just a short window to shoot this thing through the junipers, and I pick a pin, release. It's my 60 instead of my 40, and I shoot over the elk's back. Whew, he's gone. And at that point in time, we call in another bull that I then shoot real high in the shoulder, and it's just a really, really, really sad evening. And I missed the bull of a lifetime, the bull of a couple lifetimes probably. I don't know what this thing would score. After watching the footage and evaluating him for hours of my life and dreaming about it and waking up and thinking about it, he's probably well over 350. So just an absolute stud. And you mentioned that sight was the opposite of what I do now. I now shoot a vertical pin that has one main pin and then a one in the same stack. So it's just two pins, but there's only one thing in your sight picture, really open sight picture, so I can have no confusion or anything about what pin is what, because on that sight, both of those pins were yellow. And in the heat of the moment, I just picked the bottom yellow one instead of the top yellow one on accident. So that was between that and just learning how to hunt elk a little bit better, that's just kind of what I've changed since then.
That was a rough day, dude.
It was tough. It was awesome. Best day of elk hunting of my life, and also really, really heartbreaking.
Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls. I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.
The rest of the trip was very tough.
Yes.
Because you're just, like, there were days you just sit there and wouldn't hear hardly anything. You're like, what did we do to ourselves, you know? Yep, tough day. So, you know, same year, same state as I just talked about, Iowa, 2019. KC and I had done our trip. It was a week-long trip, ended on Halloween. Had some technical difficulties on the way back, and I mean, we're just broke as it gets. KC's got to go to work, and I have this tag that I need to go hunt on. So we had to, I had back up there probably like the 14th or something like that. I can't remember exactly when now, of November. So after like what you traditionally think of as the heat of the rut or the heart of the rut, however you want to say it. And I end up sleeping in the back of a truck in a Casey's parking lot and just, you know, poor boy in it big time up there. I'm working hard because this is, you know, that's what you do when you have a great tag. I'm going in 1.5 miles in the middle in the dark, slipping down these like creeks and I banged the bow off my head one morning. Like things are just.
I forgot about that.
Oh, dude, I was just struggling mentally, you know. I mean, physically it was hard, but then that weighs on your mentality because you're physically tired and you just have a bad attitude when you're tired. I mean, ask my kids. But anyway, I go in one morning. This is probably maybe the third morning or second morning that I hunted, and I'm gonna hunt a ridge. I don't know how to hunt ridges. I grew up in, you know, basically Gulf Coast plains, right? So I got some ideas after listening to some podcasts, talking to a bunch of people that I know, and then just generally hunting deer and knowing what deer like to do. I put some ideas together on this ridge. I get in there in the dark. I kind of bust a deer in the dark. I saw his eyes or whatever, her eyes. And anyway, so I get up on top of this ridge. I'm like, do I hunt the top? Do I hunt what they call the military crest or whatever? And I end up finding out that there are a couple of like secondary drainages that come off the top and drain down into this big riverbed system, right? And so to me, those little draws are things that deer don't really want to go up and down in. So I kind of hunt the top of that draw. That one is the one especially, right? But there's a couple of them, and they kind of happen to be on the same elevation line. So I'm like, I'm going to hunt right on top, and I'm not exactly up on top, but I'm very, very close to the very top of the ridge, right? And once I get up in a tree, I can see all the ridge, you know, almost to, pretty much to where it starts to bail off to the other side. So I can see the top of the ridge. Well, I'm sitting there pretty early on, and I think I might have already seen a doe, and I hear something walking in the leaves, and it's, to my surprise, it was a buck, but pretty far away. Like I think he was still, he probably was still like 80 yards or more, and I was surprised I could hear him. You know, it was just a weird thing where the leaves traveled down there to me, right? I've got the wind. He's walking down this ridge towards me, and I'm like, oh, this is good. I get the camera on. I get it pointed in a direction, zoomed in a little bit. I'm like, right there is about 20 yards, and I'm going to point the camera there. So I get it set up. I range. Yep, that's 20, and I get ready. He comes into the frame, and he getting ready to stop in the hole right there, and I'm fixing to draw back, and I get ready to draw back, and this deer stops in my lane, and I'm like, oh, that's great. No lie, you can see it. It's on video. The camera, I've got a pretty heavy lens on it. The fluid head that holds the camera in its spot just kind of gave. I don't know, you know, I just didn't turn it tight enough, I guess. And it just goes whoom, nose down, straight towards the ground. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So he stopped at 20 yards, and it's just freaking me out, you know. So I get the camera back, and I'm like, oh, I can get it kind of straightened back up. And about the time I get it back on him, he turns and starts walking right at me from 20 yards. And I'm like, this ain't good, you know. It could be good, you never know. But he's just doing his thing. He's cruising up on top of this ridge. So I get ready to you know, draw back on him, and he's getting to the point where he ends up just walking through my frame. He's getting so close, right? And I can't remember if this is on video or not, but I can see it in my mind. He basically gets like within 5 yards or so, and then looks at the tree and kind of gets like this puzzled look all of a sudden, you know, and then follows the tree up slowly and looks right at me in the tree. And I'm like about to put pressure. I got pressure on the string, you know what I mean? And then he just, boom, turns, flips, bolts off, goes over the ridge. And I'm crushed because it's like day 10 of Iowa hunting after the 7 or 8 days before and the 2 or 3 days we've got in this trip, right? And I literally have no money, y'all. I have no money. And I'm just so sad. I didn't get it done, you know, right there. And it should have been. So essentially, what I figured out, and this is the mistake, and then what I learned from it, and it's pretty obvious, is that deer was coming at my tree, and I ended up going up this tree from the uphill side because it made it easier to get higher, right? So instead of putting my sticks on the downhill side and going up and not being quite as high, I gained a little extra footage from going on the uphill side. Well, the thing is, those deer are going to cruise, and you know, essentially the downhill side is the side that I had protected and I had the wind blowing to and everything because the draws that came up it, you know, kept me protected that direction, but I didn't put my sticks on that side. I have black Muddy Pro sticks. I haven't done any camo taping to them or anything, right? I can look back and almost guarantee you that deer saw that bottom step and then just was like, that's a weird shape in the woods, right? Looked up and followed those sticks all the way up to me, and now there's a giant, you know, snuffleupagus up in this tree. And so the lesson is that now I'm very conscious about putting my sticks on what I perceive to be the correct side of the tree that deer are not going to approach from.
Mm-hmm. Man, that was a tough go of it, but that got a little bit better.
It did.
But we're not talking about the good stuff.
No good stuff today, only bad. Yeah.
So, same year. 2019 was a tough year. You know, quite honestly, I'm thankful that the element made it through 2019.
Yeah, me too.
Because we just had a bunch of bad stuff go down. And we had a lot of pep talks, a lot of like, hey, what are we going to do was pushing way late in the season that year in Kansas. I had permission on a really nice piece of ground, and there were some big deer around. I'd messed up a couple opportunities at some bigger bucks, or just had them just not go my way, and found myself where I really don't like to be, and that is hunting deer in December up north. Because it's cold and
lonely.
You're on the plains by yourself, and there's just not a lot going on. Like in Texas, you can always just still feel pretty good about December, at least for a little bit. Like there's going to be some rut action or something, But at that point in time, there literally is hardly any deer on the landscape. Who knows where they go? And then they're just like only coming out right at last light to go get something to eat. And that's what I was doing. It's dead calm because that's also what happens late in the year. If you've hunted December on the plains, it's like windy in the day, and all of a sudden, like at 5, the wind just quits, and you can't like just move your finger without scaring a deer, right? So I had one of those situations going on. I had a really great setup where I would come in and just drop off the side of this bluff and climb a tree right there. So, like, it's just the perfect approach to this setup. And I had corn out here and had a lot of deer coming to it, pretty good trail camera pictures. Went in for an evening hunt, and I was kind of like gonna about near shoot anything. And this, like, pretty nice 8-point comes in. It's 2 or 3 year old. I don't know. It's late in the year. I don't have any meat in the freezer because I missed that giant elk. So I'm trying to shoot something, right? Well, this deer pops his head around the end of the bluff, and I see him out there like 100 yards. I'm like, okay, it's about to go down. So I get ready, and I just have this idealized thing about I'm going to shoot him when he gets to the food because he's going to be relaxed. So I let this deer walk right underneath my stand at like 12 yards. And I film him and everything. I got my bow in my hand, and I just let him get over there to the food. Well, lo and behold, it's so quiet that he just knows I'm there pretty much. Like, I go to kind of trying to move around. He looks at me, and he just goes back to eating. And I'm like, oh, gosh. I was trying to draw my bow. He looks at me. I got my bow drawn. And I'm thinking, I'm fine. 30 yards, whatever. Set on my pin, shoot. He drops. I hit him high on the shoulder, and he runs off like 100 yards and just looking around. And that's never really a good thing whenever that deer's got an arrow in it, and he's just like, whatever. I don't know what's going on. But I don't get another shot at the deer. He jumps the fence and seems like he's gone. Well, I get down, run up the hill, try to get some footage of this deer, and sure enough, I do. I can see the buck. He's like 400 yards from where I shot him, and he's not dead. He's just standing around, looking around. Gave him all night, and didn't like that very much. It wasn't a very fun evening, and me and a buddy went out there the next day trying to find the deer, and we found like one little spot of blood, and then we found a dead deer carcass, but you couldn't see. There's just like hair and a little bit of stomach content. So I don't know if that was him or not, but either way, I didn't recover the deer. And it was kind of a pretty heavy blow for me at that point in my life. I had a pregnant wife at home, like all this kind of stuff. Like, am I even pursuing a pursuit that I need to be after, And had to do some soul searching on that deal. And as y'all know, we are where we're at right now. But in that situation, I learned quite a bit. I learned that you don't shoot an alert deer, and if you do, you need to account for it, because I just put it where you'd shoot a deer and shot, and he dropped, and I hit him high in the shoulder. I was also shooting a really heavy arrow with a fixed blade, and I don't know how confident I was with that at that late in the season, because you just don't end up shooting your bow as much as you should late in the year. So, like, there's a lot of considerations to that. And really, what I learned, and it sounds like that you learned too, is that self-filming is hard. Yeah. If you want to not kill deer, self-film. And it's actually something that we kind of addressed after all, because really, if I hadn't had the camera, I'd have shot that deer at 12 yards. I'm trying to get footage of him, you know? And so, like, going forward, that's something that we addressed a lot. We got a lot of guys that go with us and film our hunts now, so I'm very thankful for that. Yeah. But, that's how that went.
That was a big change for us. We actually, opened up the idea of having an intern to help us with the camera stuff next year, and that kind of thing, right? But it didn't really work out, and but it was the idea that we had, and we've kind of pursued. And in 2021, Eric has been a big help since then. For me, 20 and 21 went well for me, and so I'm basically skipping those years.
Do you want me to do my 2020 thing that I have?
Yeah,
then?
I think so. Because in 2020, I had the best year I've ever had.
Oh, you were
and I didn't
hammer time.
I didn't have any obviously you're gonna have some mess ups, but I didn't have any I missed the deer, shot the deer, whatever. I pretty much everything I pursued just about I was getting it done. And obviously I'm not trying to lift myself up here at all. I'm just saying that's the way it went. 21. Very similar thing. I shot 5 deer in 20 and 4 in 21, and things were good. And then I decided to get knocked down this year a little bit more. So the Lord decided I needed to maybe. But you have something in between there.
Yeah,
huh?
in 2020, I was self-filming on the ground. You went with the camera guy because you were going to film in a tree, and we just thought it was a better situation. So that's what we did. I learned a lot on this hunt because I'm on the ground in Plain State. It's early October, which is kind of just bed to food, which is exactly what I was hunting. It was just awesome. We'd been setting up kind of playing the short game, just waiting on the day for this spot to open up wind direction-wise. We actually waited 5 days to be able to go hunt. We knew we were going to kill stuff. And sure enough, this is the same night that Tyler shot this deer.
Yeah,
right here.
Toad.
Yeah,
toad. If you're watching on YouTube, you're like, oh, that deer actually means a lot to me.
That's a cool.
It's crazy
buck,
to think about, but it is a cool buck. But really the experience and that evening, the whole thing put together, just being out there under the stars in the middle of nowhere with no sound, no wind. It was just an amazing night.
That's a cool place, man. I hope we get to go back there someday.
Yeah.
Well, because I have unfinished business.
Yeah.
I'm set up in this little clump of plum trees in the middle of a hayfield that has a little bit of old alfalfa, but there's some real good alfalfa up the hill that all the deer just start filtering to. I mean, early, I had deer on me probably 5 o'clock, and it don't get dark till 7:30 or 8, or I don't even remember, right? Early, I had deer on me. And finally, after some younger bucks and some does filter by, it's getting kind of late. It's after sunset. I see a big rack pop up over the hill. And I can only see 60 or 80 yards from where I'm set up. It's one of those deals where it's the right spot to kill from, but it ain't a great hunting spot, And I've got my camera strapped to 6 of those little plum bushes all pulled up together, and it's kind of helping me have a couple shooting lanes in there. Well, this deer, I can see his trajectory. He's a big 8-point with tall brows, a Pope and Young type deer, might have been at that point in my life the biggest deer I'd ever shoot. So I was stoked, right? And something about big brow tines, they get me going real quick. I see those big brows, I'm oh, it's a giant buck.
Oh, this is the coolest buck, dude.
I was stoked. And he's skyline. It's just beautiful, picturesque, right? But I know that this deer's not going to come any closer to me than maybe 50 or 60 yards, and I'm not ready to take that shot. So I get out my grunt call. Early October, grunt at this deer. He responds right away. He knows that I'm over there, and he's starting to kind of circle around trying to get the wind from where I'm at, but he's not going to make it to the wind before I get a shot. I kind of get ready, get in position, get my camera right in the gap, ready to go. I draw my bow. He comes into the gap. I actually adjust the camera with my bow a little bit, kind of a weird thing to do, right? But, again, my focus was taken off of exactly what I needed to be doing. What I do, a deer was he's probably 20 yards, right? He was close. Tyler's watching all this from a hill, a quarter mile away. It's kind of crazy.
We had already shot, got out of the tree, packed up, and we were sitting on a hill just watching what he was looking at,
Yeah, it was weird. And I just put my pin where I thought it needed to be and shot my bow 20 yards, the deer's not going to move very much. Well, he moved a little bit. It wasn't a ton, but somehow, some way, I just ended up hammering this deer right in the front knuckle, just the worst place. I was shooting the heaviest setup I've probably ever shot. Maybe it was 587 grains with a cut-on contact broadhead, a really heavy setup, the thing you're supposed to shoot to be able to, overcome that. Which I guess you could always go heavier, right? Whatever. either way, I was just astounded at what happened. No penetration. Deer wheels out, runs off. I'm kind of like, don't know what to do. I'm a little bit freaking out because like I pulled it off, but at the same time, he's not lying there dead. And I didn't know much at that point in time, but I knew that, I don't know if we're going to find this deer or not, And y'all are kind of freaking out because you see him run off like crazy, so you know I shot. And, ends up we let him sit overnight. We go in the next morning, don't find any blood, and end up bumping him. And I see him healthy. He's like kind of running around down in this draw, and then like runs out across to a different property. So he survived that. He probably got shot with a rifle, but he made it through that encounter. And what did I learn really from that, though? I think it was that I needed to really hone in on aiming and understand, because I was doing like left to right, if you can imagine aiming on a deer, like body-wise. I knew where the vitals were, but I wasn't aiming low enough on deer, I don't think. I think I learned I needed to be aiming lower on deer, and that was something I really learned from that. And then it just, too, like what to do with an alert deer and how to take a shot and to not rush things, because, honestly, that deer was looking right at me when everything happened. And I think there's this thing that deer do that people don't realize, and that's when they are at alert and have you pinned, it's different than when they're at alert and they're looking in front of them, because they'll always, if they're like this and they're thinking about spooking, they'll look in front of them for a second and think about what they're going to do. And that, I think, is when you should shoot, because that deer, he didn't hear my bow, because it's so close, whatever, but he still saw it before the arrow hit him, right? He, like, the motion of you shooting your bow is the first thing that a deer can perceive, right? So I think that, he's just looking right down the barrel. I think that could have contributed towards it.
That kind of continues from your last story a little bit, and with the whole pivotal time for you and everything, and you were getting a little bit weary with the bow hunting thing a little bit. You're like, man, I don't even know if I should be doing this.
I remember we had that talk on the way home, if I should be a bow hunter or not.
And then November came, and Casey had one of the coolest things ever happen, but we can't talk about it because we're not talking about the good ones, So y'all just had to go back and watch some of the stuff that happened in 2020 and came out whenever it came out. But anyway, so as I talked about, 20 and 21 were really good for me. And then I got to this year, and it was really close to being, right there at the top, best year ever as far as just successes and everything, and just like completing in what I was trying to do, right? But it ended up being it was a rough year, from that standpoint, and it was also just a tough year for me, like in my life as well. Just had some things happen that just were not very fun to go through during deer season. But anyway, so if you've watched Buck Truck, you've probably seen this, but if you watch the South Dakota Buck Truck, you definitely have seen this. In South Dakota this year, we got there like a day early before the season started. And I guess long story short, by day 2, I am looking in the morning at a buck that is in some of the thickest, nastiest willow stuff I've ever seen, getting ready to bed up. And we bet him, which we didn't really know exactly where he bedded. We just lost sight of him, and we knew he hadn't come out of there, right? So we had an idea within probably an acre or so where he was bedded. Well, I also plan, this tree is the way to get him if we can get him tonight. He's going to come out this way. He's going to head, this direction, potentially get a drink here, and then potentially go to food here. So Eric and I head in that afternoon. We went back and got lunch, come back, head in that afternoon, get in there, nice and early, and so we can kind of make sure everything's good. Never been in this spot ever. I was glassing from a long ways, a different direction, a long ways away or whatever. But so we go in there. I had all this stuff plotted on OnX, and we get to the tree that I want to get in, and just sure enough, like I thought there would be. I couldn't tell for sure from the maps, but I thought there would be water in this low spot, and there was a little bit there. And that made me really pumped because I think I'd seen a deer go that direction and dive off in this little low spot the day before, but I didn't know for sure there was water in there. Sure enough I'm pumped. We're going to get in this tree. I'm going to have a shot at this water hole right here and up on top where I expect deer might be coming. This buck especially would be coming, and potentially if he misses or doesn't go to water, he at least comes by me and I get a shot at him before he goes to feed that night. So with that in mind, this tree is about the only tree that's going to hold the both of us, but it's a willow tree, and willow trees get gnarly, and the bark is like loud. So we're going up as quiet as possible. I've got some super lightweight sticks that want to kind of lift off the tree a little bit because of the bark being kind of just spongy and big and everything. So it's just a loud setup, but we're being as quiet as possible. We get up in there, and the best thing I can do is still a very awkward position, and I'm holding myself with my left leg the whole time so that I can see the right direction, and it's wanting to swing me around in that saddle and not give me the best opportunity. So I'm kind of holding myself awkwardly and to get this view back this way and get the shot and everything. Well, we have a doe come by. She gets weird because our wind is blowing at the trail that I'm going to be shooting at, but the deer's going to give me a shot before he gets my wind, right? Well, the doe gets her wind. Instead of continuing on, she goes back into the cover. And I was like, man, that might have messed the whole thing up because there's not a whole lot of cover back in there. And it wasn't hardly 10 minutes later probably. I'm looking around, and I'm like, I think that's a rack right there. I pull my binos up, and oh, yeah, he's coming. He's like 70 yards away, coming through thick willows. And I tell Eric, and he finally gets the camera on him, and I'm ready or whatever. He's coming just right down the pipe, and I think he might dip down in this water. Well, he doesn't. He just kind of carries on. So I had drawn back when he was like at 30 and went behind a big willow, and so I'm following him, and I just like I'm on his shoulder. I mean, he's a no doubt shooter for me in this place, and that on this
he's
at this
a big
time.
deer.
He's a nice 8-point, and he comes walking down this trail, and I'm just following him through my peep sight and sight housing and everything, and he's getting kind of where it's like, man, he could get my wind at any point here. I need to kind of get this thing off, right? Well, he's so close that I can't even see his full body in my sight picture for whatever reason. I can just remember seeing it, just his shoulder, right? And so I feel like I'm in the pocket. At least when I first kind of like close my left eye and dial in, I feel like I'm in the pocket, And I'm following him, and he's going through these willows, and these willows are like more and thicker than I thought they would be probably, And so he's kind of disappearing here and there just for split seconds, and I'm just tracking. And finally it gets to the point where he's like 10 or 12 yards probably, so close. I've shot 2 deer at 15 yards on the walk and smoked them both. I mean, just watched them fall. So I feel confident in this, putting about maybe a 6-inch lead on the spot that I want to hit, And so I pull the trigger, and I am shocked, but the arrow hits front knuckle and doesn't go in at all. And I just got the sick feeling all of a sudden, just anxiety falling out and everything. I want to throw up. I want to pass out. I know it's a bad situation. We are more than likely not going to find this deer. I mean, nearly 100%, I felt like. But long story short, we didn't find him. We could never locate this buck and finish him out. The blood was not good at all. I had like one little section that we kind of got excited about, and that was about it. We were following tracks pretty much. Mm-hmm. And so, it was a big blow because it was day 2 of like a 7-day hunt, and I felt kind of like the deer was going to live. But when you do stuff that you put on video, sometimes you have to kind of try to have a little different perspective, I guess, and just, make people not hate you so bad at least. And so I decided to eat my tag. Not a fun thing. I became a bird hunter at that point.
Yeah, that's a tough one because we're up there for so long. We're so far from home. You're just kind of trapped.
Can't do anything. I had fun bird hunting and stuff and scouting with y'all and helping out and stuff. But
hey, it led to me, directly led to me shooting a deer.
Well, I try hard to just go, okay, well, how would I do this and kill one and then give all my information to KC? And so,
well, thank you. Sorry it went that bad for you.
It was not fun. The lesson I learned is that I probably, in that situation with the willows, I think if I'd have had a clear shot, I'd have probably just shot him on the walk. But I think with the willows, I should have tried to stop him. And I think that I was afraid to stop him. I know I was, because I thought the grunt would spook him. And I've done that before. Actually, we're staring at a place right now out the window that I've spooked a buck with a grunt. So what I should have done is, this is an idea that KC gave me, is this.
Give him the old sniff.
Dude, that it'll lock a deer up. That
Practice
sound.
it. Try it.
It is.
Next time
Yeah.
you're around does or whatever.
Yeah. Just a sniff. It's a frequency, I think, it's similar to like a leaf or a stick popping or something like that. It's a higher frequency, sits in that same range. I think that there's something to it, but I've tried it because I've had stuffy noses over the years, so I've tried it. And it works. It will make a doe pull her head up from a feeder every time,
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty crazy, and they perceive it at a very low level.
Yeah.
So it's not so much like a big sound that all of a sudden just hits them in the side of the head and they decide to take off, So that's my solution.
That sounds like it worked to me. Let me give you my last one, because I can see yours over here is a good learning point. So I want to. This is not. I feel like I just don't learn very well. So in 2022, I was hunting some Texas public, and the deer.
Whereabouts?
That's a good question, Tom. I'm glad you asked that question. Over yonder, the deer in that area were actually really responsive to calling, which was really cool. It was like a late October, like they're getting all their stuff worked out between the bucks, so rattling and grunting worked really well. And I've been hunting this place quite a bit, and had a spot that I felt like was like a really good travel corridor. Had some bedding to the south and some food to the north. Sure enough, I was rattling that morning, rattled in a tiny buck, and then, like on the third sequence, rattled in a really nice buck from a direction I didn't expect him to come. It was like a little bit, he's coming from the north, but he was like northeast, and I expected deer to come from the west-northwest. So out of position off the bat, right? Greg and I are both in the tree. So Greg is like directly to my north, and my plan is to shoot deer as they come by us, right? Well, we rattle in this deer, and he's coming to the base of the tree, because deer are way better at this than we are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they know where that sound came from. Well, this deer ends up getting too close, so close that I can't shoot him. He's like at 14 yards through Greg, and I cannot see the deer. I'm all out of position. My tether is, coming down to my bridge right here. I have my bow on this side. I have a tree tether and a Greg, and a deer's on the other side of us. So no shot. And I'm like crying, right? Because, dude, I haven't shot anything besides a meat buck on Texas public land. Like, I really want to shoot a public land buck really, really bad in Texas. And this is like my opportunity. Rattling a really nice, this doesn't happen often. But like, this deer was like, not questionable on width.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was for sure wide enough.
Yeah.
Like, oh, awesome.
It's a good feeling.
I'm so glad he's behind
Nothing
my
worse
friend.
than just killing one stone dead and being like, I don't know,
I
man.
hope he's big enough. Yeah. And that's why we don't shoot a lot of them, right? Because you just never know, because they're just tiny here. But anyways, finally, the deer gets weird and kind of like half spooks and goes out, and I grunt stop him, and I get over my bridge, and I'm doing the whole hang out like a monkey from the tree like this, and he's at 32 yards or something like that. I can't remember. I didn't range him, but I had ranged the area, so I had a really good idea of how far he was. And he's quartering away. I mean, it was perfect. He was on. Greg had him on film. Like, things were good. I was like, this thing's dead to rights. I was like in the moment thinking about the Mexican food. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's like done.
Mm-hmm.
Squeeze the trigger, right over his back. He's gone. What on earth happened? I still, to this day, don't know what happened. But all I can figure is that I was contorted in a way that I might not have checked my bubble. I usually check my bubble just like instinctively, so I don't know if I did or not. Like, I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But all I can figure is that I was just out of position. And through the whole thing, I was out of position. Out of position in the hunt for that deer, and out of position on the shot. So now I think that I'm going to it's hard to like change that, but I'm going to be more aware of being out of position, and I guess you might even say forcing shots, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they don't all have to die. I want them to bad,
Dude, I'm
bad,
telling
bad,
you.
bad, and that's like the killer thing that I believe I have, right? It's just how you are. If you're that kind of person, you're just going to do what it takes, right? But I do think that, like, I'm going to do my best to give a more conscious effort into making sure that everything is right for the shot.
Yeah. Well, so this last story that I have is in the same way, something that I focused on this year. And what you're saying with trying to, what you, in your case, you miss a deer clean. But if you don't, it makes for like a not fun 24 hours a lot of times. You know what I mean? And that's what happened in South Dakota. We just worked hard to try to find that deer. Just couldn't. Now in this situation, it made for a not fun several hours, but you'll get the idea here in a second. So same year, this past year, this footage, we decided that, at least for right now, that we would withhold this.
It's an incomplete story at the moment.
It's an incomplete story, essentially. So I'm going to try to complete it this year. I think there's a chance, man. So essentially, I go way deep into this place one morning with my good buddy Michael, Mustache Michael. And he's running the camera for me, and we made some good moves, and we also made a couple moves that just weren't great. I left a quiver on the ground in a spot, and I can't even remember how the whole thing went now. I've told this story before on the podcast, but essentially there was a rut fest going on in the middle of nowhere out in the grass, and we worked around this ridge finger, and I'm coming down the side of it because I think these deer are going to work downhill a little bit. And so I'm coming down the side of it, and all of a sudden I got this two-dimensional decoy, and I just see a spike all of a sudden, and I just dropped to the ground and put the two-dimensional decoy up, and he is super alert but never ran off, right? Just too much going on for this spike, and I'm like, dadgummit, we got caught bad, and Michael's right behind me. He starts videoing, and all of a sudden, maybe 2 minutes later, or maybe not even that long, a doe runs out from behind this this ridge right here that we're sitting beside, right in front of the spike, and the spike kind of busts out too. And I'm like, oh no. And so and Michael's filming it, dude. All of a sudden, Toad Daddy walks out, or not walks out, but kind of jogs out behind that doe. And so I put the decoy straight down. He wasn't looking at me. He's looking at this doe. He's perpendicular, basically broadside to me at the time. And I get kind of squared over real quick, and I grab my rangefinder, and I put it up. I'm like, you on him? He's like, yeah. I range him, and it says 47, or did it say 48? Do you remember? I don't remember either. 47 or 48. It's a long 40 shot. And I was like, oh, I got this all day. I got a 40-yard pin. I'm going to hold just a touch high. And so I go get ready to full draw, and when he looks at me, and so I go just it was quiet down in there. And so I did a quiet snort wheeze as I drew back. And he didn't really do anything when I drew back. And I took my time. I legit said, hey, let's not force this. I don't want to make a bad shot out here in the, literally a mile and a half back into this stuff. I don't want to do it. So I don't want to be chasing this deer. Well, I ended up chasing him, but it wasn't because I didn't take an extra second, and really the pin was locked. And I shoot, and it is looking good, y'all. It's going, and it was going, and it ends up, of course, not quite making it to him. It goes right under his brisket and just barely clips the back of his tricep, essentially, I guess, just barely clips it. And he just mule kicks beautiful. Footage is incredible. He would have been the second biggest deer I shot this year. No, probably third. I don't know. He was pretty big. He was comparable to the Nebraska buck that I shot, but probably a little heavier. And his G3s were maybe a little bigger too, but he didn't have the 9th point.
The footage is throw up good.
Oh, it's so good. It's you don't know how bad I'd love for y'all to see this footage, but we just haven't completed the story yet. Yeah. Hopefully we're going to. I'm going to go back in there after him again this year, hopefully. Woo. But anyway, so I hit him, and it was just low, and I really felt great about it. I was really kind of shocked, and also had the same throw-up feeling that I had in South Dakota. Well, so anyway, I tried to get back on him, and we ended up searching for him for a couple hours. I searched every canyon I could get to. We walked probably several miles. I think we walked over 4 miles that morning, which is, quite a lot. And especially that time of the season, it's like mid-November, I was probably, starting to put weight back on. And anyway, never could find it, never jump him out of a canyon or anything. And it just was not, it was a sad day for me, But I guess the lesson that I really learned was when I got back home that week, and we went down to our local bow shop, and I don't know what I was doing exactly, but maybe I was going to just shoot it through paper and make sure it was good or whatever. Well, my friend Brett comes up to me and he goes, "Man, your bow is like way out." And I was like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, I don't know what he said, how much it was out, but he told me it was pulling 67 pounds. It was pulling 71 the last time I left the bow shop. So it's pulling 4 pounds less. And I almost did the Yankee thing there. Across. There's people mad at me right now, so I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. Anyway, I was pulling 4 pounds less, and I just thought, man, that's the difference. I mean, if y'all could see the footage, it's so close to the brisket, it's not even funny. And, I mean, if I was probably 2.5, maybe 3 inches up, I'm for sure that deer's dying inside. You know what I mean?
Dude, yeah.
And I'm just thinking about it, and I'm like, man, I don't have a whole lot of time in the season with as much as we travel, but I just need to – it's like part of the deal. Like, I need to make sure that my bow, before I go, after I come back, is shooting like it is, I need it to, for my sake, but also for the deer's sake, just to make sure I'm making great shots on deer that, I've practiced for.
Yep.
So
it's a good point, man. And I think that we can take some measures to make it happen. And I think maybe we just need to be a little bit more intentional with some things. And that's just kind of how this goes. We got to learn every year. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're not learning, you're dying, like you are not making any ground up. So appreciate y'all sticking with us through this. Hopefully you can learn from our mistakes, and you're going to make your own. But maybe they'll at least be different than this, and you'll get a lot better, right? We will make sure and include all of these hunts in the description through some links, so you can go look at this stuff on YouTube, see how dumb we are, and then maybe be able to do better than us. But we appreciate y'all. We appreciate your support through the years, through all of our dumb mistakes. And remember, this is your element.
Live in it.
Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.